Omens Eternal is finally out, the set that I've been personally waiting for by far the most. I've been holding it in for a whole year, but this set, in my opinion, is where Shadowverse Evolve begins to be peak. We go from cool generics and interesting pile decks to suddenly these awesome archetypes and so many amazing characters. Let's just get right into it. Starting off these competitive decks, we're gonna have Havencraft, and of course it is still gonna be the King Elephant combo, but including some new faces and some old cards used to adapt to the meta. For those of you unaware, King Elephant is basically the win con of this deck. It was the same thing last set too, where you essentially establish a huge storm follower that can ignore ward on evolve and basically just buffs himself up like crazy with the amount of cards in your hand. But this deck got so many new tools in this set that has made it even more consistent. We had Sukuna in the last set, but in set 5 we have the introduction of Sheena Dynamite Daredevil, who's a 2-cost 3/2, which is already really good in stats, and on Fanfare lets you either look at the top 5 and find a 1-cost follower, or destroy an enemy 1-cost follower. This is huge because of course it lets you find your Mei and your Sukuna, so that of course can contribute to your combo potential, but it also clears away any of your opponent's 1-cost followers, and as you'll see from the decks we're going to look at today, there's a lot of them. The other very important addition to this deck that has made it kind of pivot into a more combo-based playstyle is Spinaria, Keeper of Enigmas. She's a 5-cost 3/5 with ward, and on Fanfare looks at top 4 to find a Forestcraft follower and Forestcraft spell and add them both to your hand, and the rest goes to bottom. But if you play her on combo 3 or more, she also recovers 3 play points, being virtually a 2-cost 3/5 with ward that pluses 2 to your hand. So this is really important, and that's why we're actually kind of switching things up a little bit in terms of this deck list as well. You see the return of the Elven Princess Mage because she sets up the fairies that help you to achieve those combo counts very easily. We've still got a lot of the OGs that have been vital in this deck, so you got Cassiopeia in here, Ancient Elf, Crystalias. But one card that I feel like is very important in this specific format that was from set 1 that's coming back is Homecoming. Homecoming is a 3-cost spell that again you can find off of your Spinaria, which lets you target an enemy follower in the field, and your opponent has to either put that on top or bottom of their deck. But if you play this on combo 5, so again you see the importance of the combo, your opponent puts each follower from their field on top or bottom. Now you might be thinking, well, this is a set 1 card, why is it suddenly so important? The top dogs in this meta really like their cemetery recursion. Alice wants to have the Humpty Dumptys, etc., you know, the tin soldiers in the cemetery to be able to revive them. If they get bot decked or put the top deck, I mean, you are delaying their game plan and also mitigating their damage potential as well. Abyss is also a big player in this meta too, and being able to out their techs is also very important. It hurts to say this, but if my important disdain followers get bot decked or even put the top deck, like I want to see them in cemetery to be able to revive them, so having them disappear isn't exactly the best either. So as you'll see from the decks we look at today, there's a lot of things that this spell is actually quite strong against. Moving to Sword, we have of course Thief Sword, and this list of course is basically, when this set came out in Japan, this was considered the best deck in format until people realized that Haven was actually even better. To explain what Thief Sword does, it quite literally steals your opponent's cards thanks to Octress. Octress on Fanfare mills the top 2 cards of your opponent's deck. If you don't know what milling means, it basically means that you discard the top card of the deck. So you mill 2, and then you can evolve her for 2, or if your opponent has 10 or more cards in the cemetery, then she evolves for 0, and on evolve she takes a card in your opponent's cemetery and puts it into your own EX area. And as long as your opponent has 10 or more cards in the cemetery, the cards you play from your EX area cost 2 less. So oftentimes, you know, you're playing against Dragon, you can steal a Dragon's Oracle. If they play Fina in their deck, you can steal it and use it yourself. Hell, you can steal a Forte if you want to and then play it for 2. On top of that, Octress also lets you play 8 play points to choose a card in your opponent's cemetery and play it straight, not even put into EX area, just play it for 0 play points. You mill your opponent's Genesis Dragon. Let me get that real quick. So Octress, while she has the entire archetype built around her, she's also generic. You can just slide her into any sword deck and be able to access your opponent's cemetery. But we are building around her, and so there are a lot of really strong cards that accompany her as well. Avaritia is her exclusive search spell. Servant of Usurpation is one of the best cards you can possibly start with in the early game, especially going first. It's a 1-drop that's a 1/2 that on Fanfare mills the top card of your opponent's deck, and every time your opponent gets milled, he gets +1 attack. So by far the craziest thing you can do is like turn 1 play this, then turn 2 play 2 more of him. So you've milled 3 cards and you got a 4/2, 3/2, 2/2 just sitting on the board. If that's not enough damage, you got Disciple of Usurpation, which is a 3-cost 3/2 with Storm, and on Strike your opponent mills the top card of their deck, and if they have 10 or more cards in the cemetery, he gets +2 attack. This is the reason why everyone plays Angelic Snipe. in their list right now. So every list that I show you, if Angelic Snipe is not in there, consider putting it in as well. But I play it in this example list as well, just because for the mirror, you're gonna need it. Angelic Snipe takes care of the 5 damage from Disciple for just a 1 cost, so it's very important to have in this format. But if they don't have it, you're basically putting in 5 damage into their face, which is pretty good. Usurping Spine Blade is basically the best quick spell that Sword has gotten so far, being a 3 damage and then milling 1, and if they have 10 or more cards in Cemetery, it's basically a 5 damage to a selected follower. So it's really good for 2 costs. That's a very good trade-off, and it works really well with the archetype. And then we also have the Apostle of Usurpation that mills 2 cards for your opponent's deck, and if they have 10 or more in their Cemetery, you draw a card. And on Evolve, he lets you deal 4 damage to an enemy follower, so he's also really good at clearing the board. This archetype works really well with the Sword generic, so you can have your Searchers, you have your Fina to find your Servant or your Swordsman or your Bellringer. Leonidas still works pretty well in here as well, since the Disciple can get buffed even more, and actually doesn't get taken out by Angelic Snipe anymore either. And Aurelia is good just when fighting against those big boards, but those are definitely flexible spots that you can choose to replace with other cards that you feel you might need for this format. You might also be able to see some gameplay of this deck on some specific channel in the future, but more information on that will come further down the line. By the way, check out on the official Shadowverse Evolve channel, me and Igni have been featuring in a lot of different videos, revealing exclusive cards and doing all kinds of other gameplays, so you might want to check that out. Moving on to Runecraft, we have one of the most popular Shadowverse characters of all time, Lishena. So this is Control Rune, and there's many different ways to build it, and honestly I was debating like showing 3 different lists for Lishena, but they told me to choose just 1 to feature, so I decided to feature 2 best girls, as we got both Lishena and Gilneas in here. So what does Lishena do? Lishena is a 4-cost 2/4 that on Fanfare puts 2 tokens into your EX area. One of them is Destruction in White, which says that at the start of your main phase you heal your leader 2, and the other one is Destruction in Black, which is also a 2-cost amulet that at the start of your main phase deals 2 damage to each enemy leader. So basically every turn you're healing 2, dealing 2, and while yes, they go to EX area, so you have to wait another turn to pay 3 play points and play them out, you get a bunch of reward for doing this. Lishena does have her own Searcher in Destructive Refrain that if you already found her, you can use the second effect of in order to pay 2 extra play points and deal X damage to all enemy followers, equaling the number of idolatry cards on your field. So Lishena's amulets are idolatry, and she herself is idolatry as well. Speaking of, we also have Servant of Destruction, which on Fanfare says if you have 3 or more idolatry cards in the field, gets to evolve for 0. And if you do evolve him either for 2 cost or for the 0 that is gained from the Fanfare, you can select an enemy follower in the field and deal 2 damage to it and its leader. While being a 4/4, basically for 2 costs, it's pretty good. There's also a really good quick spell called Monochromatic Destruction that says you choose an enemy follower in the field as a quick, you deal 2 damage to it, and then if you have 2 idolatry cards in the field, so basically just the amulets, you also deal 2 damage to the leader, and you heal your leader too. So basically it just doubles up on your amulets, so it's really easy to just drag out the game, play the long game, and just burn your opponent down in combination of the amulets and this spell. But of course, to play the long game, we need a lot of the good rune cards. You see Merlin in here, we got the Agnes Tachyon in here, we got Europa in here as well, Rime Wind, Surefire Bullet, Witch Bolt, all the different ways to take care of our opponent's board. But we do have some new additions in the neutral side as well with that Gilneas. So if you don't know, Gilneas says that she's a 4-cost 3/5 with Drain. On Fanfare, if you play an extra 3 play points, so a total of 7, you can search your deck for an Apostle of Craving and Craving Splendor, put them to the EX area and shuffle your deck. Her other Fanfare also says that if both players have 10 play points, she lets you draw 3. And every time you play a neutral card, she deals 1 damage to each enemy leader. So we have her, her Apostle and the Splendor in here too, but there's also some other neutrals in this deck like Angelic Snipe and Surefire Bullet that can proc Gilneas' effect for damage too. So Apostle of Craving is a 3-cost 2/2 that says as long as you have Gilneas on board, it costs 3 less to play from EX, so it's a 0 cost that on Fanfare gives another follower rush on the field, which means you give the Gilneas a rush and then she is going to be able to drain immediately. You can also evolve the Apostle, and then he's going to give another follower 3 damage and give it +3 attack. So you can use this both to take out your opponent's followers on the field that might have 3 or less defense remaining, or you can give this to your Gilneas and make her drain for 6. Don't forget the Apostle itself can still attack too, so that's pretty good considering you're getting all of that out for basically 0 play points. And then Craving Splendor is the quick that can also be played for 0 if Gilneas is on the field from the EX area. And what it does is that it chooses an enemy follower, deals it 4 damage, and heals your leader 1. So that's a great way to drag out the game as you're constantly healing and pinging damage thanks to Lishena's effects. Overall, I really like like this deck, and it's going to be getting better and better over time. There will be more support for this deck in set 8, and Control Rune in general just gets random tidbits of support every here and there. And there's a lot of different ways to take this build. You don't have to necessarily play Gillilees. This is just one example. And now, oh baby, in case you didn't know or don't follow me on social media, I am quite the Galmu fan. I'm sure that clip speaks for itself, and I don't really need to convince you of much else, but it's really not an understatement to say that Galmu is the reason why I got truly competitive into Shadowverse. My video about my run during GP Chiba was basically motivated because of how much I love that deck and just wanted to feature it, and I've already talked about this deck in great length, but it was after the support I got from both set 6 and the Idolmaster collab set. I've actually not talked about her after her actual launch. So allow me to talk about my wife for just a moment. Galmu is beautiful. She also costs 5 play points, and she's beautiful, and she has 5 attack, and she's beautiful, and she also has 5 defense, just like I will spend 5 lifetimes worshipping her. Anyway, she's a 5 cost 5/5, as I said, that has a very unique effect that whenever she takes ability damage during your turn, she can evolve for 0, and that's all she does on her base body. But when she does evolve, she lets you choose an Omen card that costs 2 play points or less in your cemetery and play it for 0. And then the actual effect that she has on her evolved body is, during your turn, whenever she takes ability damage, this means both your own and from your opponent, you select an enemy leader or enemy follower in the field and deal it 3 damage. I'll immediately give you a very important ruling in that even if she is to be destroyed by effect damage, this effect will still go on standby and proc. So if, for example, you take her defense down to 2 with all your effects, and then you say, I end my turn. On end turn, your opponent goes Angelic Snipe, deal 2 damage to Galmu, and takes her out. Before she gets destroyed from hitting 0 defense, she will still deal 3 damage from her effect to something. Very important. Please keep it in mind when playing this deck. So what kind of Omen cards are we trying to dig for here? Well, you've got the Disciple of Disdain, which is a 1 cost 1/2 that for 0 once per turn lets you choose a follower on your field and deal it 1 damage. So you can basically play Galmu, play Disciple, use Disciple's effect on Galmu, deal her 1 damage. Now she evolves for free, and she can then revive something else. She can also reuse spells from the cemetery, such as Disdainful Rending, which is a 1 cost that selects a follower on your field and the enemy field. You deal 1 damage to your follower and 3 damage to your opponent's follower. So again, you can play Galmu, then play this, and then immediately deal damage to something, evolve Galmu, and just replay the Disdainful Rending for 0. So you're dealing a total of 6 damage to your opponent's board and potentially another 3 damage to your opponent's face or board, depends where you want to put it. Running low on hand, well, you can play Servant of Disdain, which on Fanfare, if you're in overflow, lets you choose another follower on the field, deal 1 damage to it and this follower. Do you see the difference between Disciple and Servant? That's right. Servant doesn't restrict you to just your board. You can even deal 1 damage to your opponent's followers too. But if you do play him outside of Overflow, he does say that during your turn, if he takes ability damage, you draw a card, not once per turn. What this means is that you can actually play this deck like a tempo deck. And in set 6, we're actually going to be cutting Dragon Oracle entirely because we're going to go full on tempo. I mean, this deck's most expensive follower is Galmu. There's no real point in necessarily going with the ramp. It's just that having more play points than your opponent is usually better. But what you can do is you can play Disciple on turn 1, play Servant on turn 2, use Disciple immediately to draw an extra card, and just keep repeating that until the Servant dies. Now, until now, Dragon needed to rely on things like Conflagration to deal big AoE damage to take care of your opponent's board. Not the case anymore thanks to Hakkyoku, or as it is in English, Total Domination, a 2-cost Omen spell that selects a follower on your field, deals 2 damage to it and each enemy follower on the field. So it's already, 2 damage AoE, but you also deal 2 damage to yourself, so it procs things like Servant and Galmu, etc. But if there's a Galmu on your field, you deal 2 more damage to each enemy follower in the field. So if you, for example, evolve Galmu and then play this, you are dealing 2 damage to her, for example, to proc her 3 damage to something, and also doing 4 AoE damage to your opponent's entire board. This also gets over aura and untargetables because it hits the entire board. So this is a really good spell that's going to be super vital in a lot of these board-based metas, so definitely keep it close to you. Sometimes you might even play it twice in one turn, so just so you know. But of course, you might be thinking, I mean, these cards are great, but how are you finding everything? And luckily there is a card that does that called Apostle of Disdain. A 3-cost 2/4 that says during your turn, whenever she takes ability damage, she gets +1 attack and Storm. So already basically a 3/3 Storm when you think about it. But you can also evolve her for 1, and on evolve, discard 1, look at top 5, find 2 Omen cards, add them to your hand, put the rest at the bottom. So now, she's not just a 4/4 Storm after evolving if you damage her, but also, you can do things like discard your Total Domination, and then dig for your Galmu, dig for your Enablers, your Rending, hell, even use that Rending the same turn to enable the Storm on the Apostle. She is one of by far the most key pieces of this deck, and so you definitely want to be looking at her, especially in your mulligan. But then of course, this deck works pretty well with generic dragon cards too. We're playing Prime Dragon Keeper because we actually play a lot of small 3-cost or lower cards in this deck too, so we can actually spam PDK's effect pretty consistently. Examples include of course Draconeer, Apostle also accomplishes this, Servant, Disciple, they all can hit Prime Dragon Keeper's restriction. But we also have Dragon Summoner, who on evolve lets you actually search for your other dragon followers so you can find your Galmu and your Apostle when necessary. Also playing 1 copy of Aqua Nereid as it's a 2-cost 0/1 ward. We actually don't really have any ward in this deck, but on Fanfare it summons a Mega Lorca, and if you're an Overflow gives it Storm. So it helps paired with Prime Dragon Keeper to get that extra little bit of damage as well. Forte of course is self-explanatory, don't really need to say much about her. And Serpent Wrath does work out pretty well in this deck since it is a 5 damage quick spell. It does cost 3, but there will be some instances where you do need that 5 damage. Just be careful about using it in the mirror because you don't want to activate your opponent's Galmu's effect during their turn. I'll be talking more about Galmu in the future, but I hope that this has introduced her well enough because she's only gonna get better. Moving on to Abyss, we actually have a double feature, which I guess makes sense considering that Abyss does initially consist of 2 different classes. First, let's take a look at Control, which of course keeps coming up and down all the time, but is exceptionally good this time, as Rune, Omen of Silence, fits in like a glove. He's a 3-cost 3/3 that says on Fanfare, if you've achieved Necrocharge 10, which of course means if you have 10 or more cards in your cemetery, you destroy an enemy 3 play point or less cost follower. And as long as he's on the field, your opponent's spells all cost 1 more, which is very disturbing. But Rulenai's sauce lies in his evolve effect, which says on evolve, each opponent discards a random card. Not only is he basically a floodgate, he is also a discard effect, which is very annoying in a lot of the coming metas. He's got his own Apostle that does say that at the start of end phase, you select an enemy leader, and if they have 3 or less cards in hand, you deal them 3 damage. He also evolves for 1 to deal 3 damage to enemy follower, but if they have 3 or less cards in hand, then you instead destroy that follower. Silent Purge is a 4-cost spell that again, not only destroys enemy follower, but also forces them to discard a random card from hand. There's so much hand hate in this set, and that's not all. Thundering Roar is a 2-cost spell that lets you either force your opponent to discard a random card, or deal 3 damage to enemy follower. But if you got Necrocharge 10, you do both. Paired with Crazed Executioner, we're just basically not letting our opponent have any kind of hand in this deck. It still of course functions really well with a lot of the old good cards in this deck, you know, Soul Dealer, Lucifer, Dark Alice, Olivia. There is the addition of the new neutral follower, Lyriel Archer Throne, where as long as she's on the field, your leader doesn't take ability damage, which is really important. And as you know, we talked about Galmu just now, it's pretty good tech. But as a quick, you can actually engage her and deal 2 damage to each enemy leader. So it's a good way to just like keep her, you know, waiting for the entire turn. And then just as you're about to get your turn back, you go opponent's end phase, quick, deal 2 damage, and then you get to refresh her. I think Control Abyss is only going to get better thanks to the inclusion of Rulenai, and especially in set 6 with the introduction of Ginsetsu, things are going to get pretty wild. Now, Rulenai and Soul Dealer aren't just going to be used in Control, you can also find them in Sanguine. So Sanguine focuses on Valneric, Omen of Lust, who is a 2-cost 2/2, that says as long as Sanguine is active for you, she has Storm. And on Strike, she'll deal X damage to each enemy leader, X equaling the number of times your leader has lost defense this turn. And if your leader's defense is 7, then she gets +2/+2. So 7 of course is a very specific number, but you're basically just playing her to be a cheap Storm follower. And her her strike effect, you can really rack up pretty well too. So, you know, to enable Sanguine, we've got Ambling Wraith. Disciple of Lust also deals 1 damage to your leader on Fanfare and does it as well on Strike. Don't forget that this deals 1 damage to both leaders, not just your own. The Wings of Lust, of course, lets you either give a follower a rush and deal a damage to your leader, or deals damage to an enemy follower and 1 to your leader, or deal 1 damage to your leader, draw a card and discard 1. So it's another nice cheap way of enabling Sanguine. Servant of Lust is a 2-cost 3/1 that on Fanfare deals damage to your leader, and on Evolve, minuses 1 defense from your leader and deals X damage to an enemy follower, which equals the number of times your leader has lost defense this turn. And as you can see, you can do that quite a lot. You've got the Apostle of Lust 2, who says whenever another demon follower is put into your field, you actually heal 1 for your leader, and you can engage him and damage your leader once to choose a 2-cost or less follower in your cemetery and put it onto the field. And as you noticed, Valneric is indeed a 2-cost. So it's really easy to kind of like rotate Valneric in this deck and just keep getting that storm damage. You've got Soul Dealer, Cerberus, and Rulanite here to kind of help out. Razory Claw, of course, to finish off the game. And Dark General actually sees play here as a 4-cost 5/5 with Storm because, I mean, Sanguine is very easy to activate in this deck. So Sanguine will come back here and there every so often, and of course, Valneric in general is just a big fan favorite, so I definitely do recommend messing around with this list too. And finally, we get on to Haven, which is arguably the best class in this meta. I'm very curious to see how things will be in Global, just because in Japan, this was the class that really dominated. Of course, we have Fabled Haven still kicking, and at this point, you're probably like, dude, how many times are you going to introduce Fabled Haven? It's like every single set. And I'm sorry, it just keeps getting support. I mentioned Fina before. She searches for 1-drops. You know what's a 1-drop you want to find in this deck? Andromeda. Prevent that Humpty Dumpty from blowing up your own board is pretty good. But most importantly, there is a card that's not even fabled, but it just works really well in this deck, which is Demon's Epitaph. A 2-cost 2/3 that just says you evolve it by discarding 1. Doesn't cost any play points. What does it do in Evolve? It becomes a 3/4 with Bane that on last words deals 2 damage to each enemy leader. Not only is a 2-cost 3/4 with Bane that's hard to take out in the first place, it also punishes you for taking it out. This just works really well in this deck because you do want to be discarding stuff because your Humpty Dumptys are forcing you to discard your hand. So this way you're setting up your cemetery while being very aggressive, which is exactly what this deck wants to do. But in my opinion, the biggest winner of this set for Haven is Control Haven, which also made a very deep run throughout the tournament season in this meta in Japan. So, you know, Heavenly Aegis, Themis Decree, all this kind of stuff has been great for a long time. So what did this deck get this set that made it so much better? We already talked about Gilneys a little bit during the Rune section of this video, so I'm not going to over-explain that side, but there is one other card, or well, package of support that really pushed Control Haven to the top for quite a while starting from this set, which is Marwyn, Omen of Repos. A 4-cost 4/4 that says you can either evolve him for 4 play points, which is a lot, or you can evolve him by skipping your next turn. What could he possibly do in Evolve to make skipping your turn worth 4? Or, I mean, paying 4 play points is also pretty hefty. Well, he goes from being a 4/4 to an 8/8 with Ward and Aura. Who put this guy here? What is this? Aegis Volume 2? On top of that, he says, to make up for skipping your turn on Evolve, he increases your maximum play points by 1. So you don't get another turn, but you kind of do in terms of play points. He also heals your leader 3. How kind. And draws a card. Man, it's almost like you got a turn, but you managed to get essentially 4/4 in play points on the board. You got to heal yourself 3, and it has Ward and Aura, so it's hard to take out. And if you go first, I mean, your opponent's still on 4 play points going second. How are they answering this huge dude with Aura? His support to this deck really gave you a nice way to tide over. You know, you go to 6 play points after that, you answer your opponent's board. You go to 7, you play your Gilneys for the full 7 play point effect. And then you go to 8, and boom, Heavenly Aegis, you're big chilling once again. Don't forget, you also have the Saviors, which is the 1-cost spell that searches your deck for the Marwyn. Or if you already have it there, or even if you don't, you can choose an enemy follower with 2 defense or less and banish it. That way, evading those pesky last word effects and not sending your opponent's important cards to the cemetery either. So Haven is once again a huge winner in this expansion. And that is it for the competitive decks of Set 5 Omens Eternal. Apologies for this video coming out with the set release rather than before, but I hope you all enjoyed it nonetheless. This is one of the sets that I personally loved by far the most when it came out in Japan. And honestly, the next few sets that will be coming out this year, I think have have produced some of the most fun metas that I've ever played in any card game, so I really hope you enjoy it as well. If you like this video, please do give it a like, and if you haven't already, please do subscribe for more Shadowverse Evolved content too. But otherwise, that's gonna be it for me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye bye.